The thunder split the sky like a wound ripping open, and Sable Finch woke to the sound of her bedroom door slamming against the stone wall. She was on her feet before her mind caught up, her pulse hammering, her bare toes curling against the freezing floor. Rain lashed the windows in sheets so thick the glass looked like it was melting. Lightning turned the room white for a heartbeat, and in that single flash, she saw him. King Caspian Aldrich stood in her doorway. She had not seen the Alpha King up close in 5 years. Not like this. He was soaked through, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, his shirt clinging to the hard lines of his chest. Water ran in rivulets down his jaw and dripped from his fingers onto her floor. But it was his eyes that stopped her cold. Those pale silver eyes that the entire kingdom feared were wide and wild and utterly, terrifyingly lost. Sable could not move, could not breathe. 5 years of silence. 5 years of being the forgotten wife tucked away in the East Wing like an inconvenient piece of furniture. Eating alone, sleeping alone, existing in a palace full of hundreds of people and being invisible to the only one who mattered. And now the Alpha King of Thornhaven was standing in her bedroom doorway at 2 a.m, drenched in rain, looking at her like she was the only solid thing left in the world. "Your Majesty." Her voice came out as a whisper. He did not answer. He just stood there, his hands braced against the doorframe like his legs might give out. Another crack of thunder shook the walls, and the candles on her nightstand flickered and died. In the darkness, she heard his breathing change. It went ragged, desperate, the sound of someone losing a fight he had been waging alone for too long. Then his knees buckled. Sable lunged forward on pure instinct. She caught him before he hit the ground, which should have been impossible because he was enormous, at least a foot taller than her, and built like the warlord he was. But she got her arms around him, her hands fisting in his soaked shirt, and braced her legs and held. He was burning hot beneath the cold rain, his skin radiating heat through the wet fabric like a furnace behind glass. His forehead dropped against her shoulder, and she felt his entire body shudder. "Please," he said. One word. Raw. Stripped of every ounce of authority and command. She had spent years convincing herself she felt nothing for him. Years building walls so high she thought nothing could breach them. And this infuriating, absent, impossible man destroyed all of it with a single word. His arms came around her waist. Not demanding. Not commanding. Just holding on. She could feel him trembling. The Alpha King of Thornhaven, the man who had conquered the western provinces, who had killed Fenris the Black in single combat, was trembling in her arms. And beneath the trembling, something worse. She could feel his wolf. Not the controlled, contained presence she had sensed from across crowded ballrooms. This was a wild thing thrashing against the walls of its cage, snarling and desperate, its claws scraping at the inside of his ribs. The beast was trying to tear its way out. And if it succeeded, the man holding her would cease to exist. Sable. He said her name like it cost him something. His voice was barely human, distorted at the edges by the growl of the beast beneath it. "I cannot hold it." Her blood went cold. He was losing the fight, right here in her arms, and there was no one else coming. No physician, no guard, no council of advisors. Just her. Just a woman he had married and abandoned, standing barefoot in a nightgown in the dark. Lightning split the sky again and lit his face from below. She saw the veins standing out along his neck, black against his skin, pulsing with something that was not blood. She saw his eyes flash from silver to gold, the wolf surging forward, and for one terrifying instant she was not looking at the king at all. She was looking at the beast. Her gift responded before her mind did. It erupted from deep inside her, a wave of warmth and stillness that poured through her hands and into him. The wolf recoiled. Not in pain, but in shock, the way a drowning animal feels sudden solid ground. The gold in his eyes flickered. Dimmed. The veins in his neck receded. His face pressed into her hair. She felt the shudder that rolled through him as the beast retreated. Not defeated, not gone. Just, for the first time in what she suspected was a very long time, quiet. "I have you," Sable whispered. "You are safe." He made a sound against her neck, low and broken and grateful. And then his weight went truly slack, the dead weight of a body surrendering to exhaustion it had been fighting for too long. The Alpha King of Thornhaven passed out in her arms. Sable stood in the dark, holding a man twice her size, the storm screaming around them, and tried to understand what had just happened. Her legs shook beneath his weight. Her nightgown was soaked through where his body pressed against hers. She could feel his heartbeat against her collarbone, too fast, too hard, like a war drum that had not stopped beating in years. She would find out soon enough what brought him here. And the answer would terrify her. Because the king had not come to her door out of love or loneliness. He had come because something else was coming. Something ancient and hungry and patient. Something that had been feeding on his wolf for years. And the storm was not weather. The storm was a door opening. But that was later. Right now, all she knew was this. His weight against her. His breath on her neck. The impossible truth that after 5 years of nothing, the king had come to her. And he was falling apart. 5 years earlier, Sable Finch had been 17 when she married the king. She had not wanted to. He had not wanted to either, which made it worse somehow, knowing that the revulsion was mutual. It had been a political arrangement, the kind that sounded clean and logical in council chambers and became something uglier when it involved actual people. The Finch bloodline carried the Ashvale gift, an ancient trait that surfaced once every few generations in the women of their house. The ability to calm feral wolves, to soothe a beast mid-shift when nothing else could reach it. The trait had been dormant for decades, but when Sable manifested it at 15, word reached the capital within weeks. King Caspian Aldrich was 23 and already feared across the continent. He had taken the throne at 19 after his father's assassination, ended a civil war within his first year, and conquered the western provinces within his second. He was brilliant, ruthless, and by every account utterly devoid of warmth. He was also, the council whispered, losing control of his wolf. The details were kept quiet. Court physicians spoke in careful euphemisms about episodes and instability. But the servants talked, and servants always knew the truth. The beast inside him was growing stronger, wilder, harder to cage. Without intervention, the most powerful alpha on the continent would become the most dangerous one. The Ashvale gift was the only known remedy, and Sable was the only living carrier. The wedding had been efficient and joyless. Sable remembered fragments, the weight of the silver crown they placed on her head, the coldness of his hand when he took hers for the binding vow, the way he had looked through her, like she was a document he was signing rather than a person he was marrying. He had spoken exactly 4 words to her that day. "You have my gratitude." That night, he had escorted her to the east wing of the palace, a sprawling suite of rooms that were beautiful and cold and impossibly far from the king's own chambers in the west wing. He had paused at the door, and for one breathless moment, she had thought he might say something real. Instead, he had said, "Your household staff will attend to anything you need. Good evening, Lady Aldrich." And then he had left. He did not come back. Not the next day, not the next week, not the next month. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Months became years. Sable ate her meals alone. She walked the East Wing gardens alone. She read alone. She had a maid named Elspeth who was kind, a steward named Drusten who was efficient, and a life that was comfortable and empty and suffocating in its politeness. She was the queen in name. She attended formal events when required, standing beside the king at state dinners. He was courteous during these appearances, always ensuring she had a chair, always introducing her correctly, never once making her feel publicly humiliated. But he never touched her beyond the minimum required by protocol. Never sought her company beyond obligation. Never once walked the 112 steps from his wing to hers. She had counted them once. The steps between his world and hers. Not so many, really. An easy walk. But he had never made it. She had tried, in the beginning. She had asked to dine with him. He had declined, politely. She had sent him a book she thought he might enjoy, a military history of the Eastern campaigns. He had sent back a formal note of thanks through Drustan. She had once walked to the West Wing herself, heart-pounding, determined to confront him. She had made it to the corridor outside his study and heard his voice inside, low and commanding, discussing troop movements. She had stood there for 3 minutes, her courage leaking away with every second, and then she had turned around and walked back. 112 steps there, 112 steps back. 224 steps of pure humiliation. After the first year, she stopped trying. After the second, she stopped hoping. After the third, she stopped caring or told herself she had. By the 4th year, she had built a life within her cage. She had started studying healing under the palace's head physician, a gruff old wolf named Theron who did not care that she was the queen and told her she was grinding the comfrey wrong. She had purpose, even if she did not have a marriage. She had routine, even if she did not have a partner. She had everything except the thing she refused to admit she wanted. By the 5th year, she had perfected the art of pretending she was fine. Her wolf, quiet and small compared to most shifters, had stopped hoping long before the rest of her did. The animal inside her had curled into a tight ball somewhere behind her ribs and gone still, the way wild things go still when they understand that rescue is not coming. And then the storm came. The storm had been building for 3 days. The skies over Thornhaven had turned the color of a bruise, and the air tasted metallic and wrong. The wolves in the kingdom grew restless. Sable could feel it, a low vibration beneath her skin, her own wolf pacing and agitated in a way she could not explain. Barometric pressure. Theron had muttered when she mentioned it. Wolves feel it before the weather breaks. Nothing to worry about. But it felt like more than weather. It felt like a warning. The storm broke at midnight. The first crack of thunder rattled the windows so violently she dropped the book she had been reading. The second one killed the lights. She was reaching for a candle when she heard the footsteps. Not a servant's footsteps. These were heavy, uneven, fast. Like someone stumbling towards something they could not quite reach. Her hand froze over the candle. The footsteps stopped outside her door. She heard breathing, harsh and labored. Then a sound that turned her blood to ice, a low, guttural growl that was not entirely human. Her bedroom door slammed open. And there he was. King Caspian Aldrich, drenched, wild-eyed, barely upright. Everything from the prologue. Everything she had never imagined. After she caught him, after his arms wrapped around her, and he said that single devastating word, Sable guided him to her bed. He could barely stand, and she was operating on instinct rather than thought. She eased him down onto the mattress. He went without resistance, which frightened her more than the growling had. The king did not yield. And yet here he was, his head on her pillow, his body curling in on itself, shaking. Sable knelt beside the bed, her hands hovering over him, afraid to touch and afraid not to. Up close, the damage was worse than she had realized. His skin was gray beneath the tan. The bones of his cheeks stood out too sharply. His lips were cracked. Dark circles beneath his eyes so deep they looked painted on. He looked like someone who had been starving for months and hiding it beneath tailored jackets and practiced composure. "When did you last sleep?" she whispered. Nothing. Just shattered breathing and tremors rolling through his body in waves. "When did you last eat?" she tried. Still nothing. His eyes were half closed, fluttering, fighting to stay conscious and losing. She pressed her palm flat against his forehead. The heat shocked her. This was not illness. This was his wolf consuming him from the inside. The feral shift she had been brought here to prevent. It was happening. She climbed onto the bed beside him and pressed both hands against his chest. She closed her eyes and reached for the Ashvale gift, the thing that lived deep inside her that she had barely used because no one had ever needed it. No one had ever asked. The gift uncoiled. She felt it rise through her arms, through her palms, and pour into him. Warmth without heat, calm without numbness, a frequency pitched to the exact wavelength of a wolf in crisis, telling the beast that it was safe, that it could rest. Caspian gasped, his back arched off the mattress, and for one terrible second she thought she had hurt him. Then the tension drained out of his body. His hands unclenched. His breathing slowed. His eyes closed. He was asleep. Sable sat beside him, her hands still on his chest, her own pulse hammering so hard it hurt. The rain beat against the windows. The storm screamed outside, and the king slept. She did not move. She did not dare. She sat there for 3 hours, her legs going numb, her back aching, her hands pressed against his chest while his fever slowly cooled beneath her palms. At some point, his fingers closed around her wrist. Not tight, just present, just holding. The gesture was so unconscious, so instinctive, that it made something behind her ribs tighten painfully. She studied his face while he slept. Without the rigid control he wore during the day, he looked different, younger. The hard lines around his mouth softened. The permanent crease between his brows eased. She could see the ghost of the man he might have been if the crown had not been forced onto his head at 19. If war and duty and loneliness had not carved him into stone. When dawn broke gray and thin, Caspian's eyes opened. He looked at her. She looked at him. The silence lasted 4 heartbeats. Then he pulled his hand away, stood, crossed the room, and paused at the door. "This does not leave this room," he said, his voice raw. He did not look at her. He left, 112 steps back to his world. Sable sat on the bed, her hands still warm from his skin, and stared at the empty doorway. If he had been this sick, why had he waited so long to come to her? And what would have happened if the storm had not driven him to her door? The answer settled in her stomach like a stone. He would have died. He would have let himself die rather than walk down a hallway to ask for help. And she had no idea why. 3 days passed. He did not come back. On the 3rd morning, Elspeth brought her breakfast tray with a sealed note tucked beneath the teacup. Sable's hands trembled as she broke the royal crest. "Your presence is requested in the West Wing study this afternoon at the 4th bell. Come alone. Aldrich. Not Caspian. Not your husband. Aldrich." Like a general issuing orders to a subordinate. She spent the next 2 hours trying on every dress she owned and hated herself for it. She finally settled on a dark green dress with simple lines and then changed her mind twice more before Elspeth gently took her by the shoulders and said, "My lady, the green. You look beautiful in the green." "I do not care how I look," Sable said. "Of course not, my lady," Elspeth replied, with the particular patience of a woman who had been managing Sable's stubbornness for years. The walk to the West Wing felt like crossing a border into a country she had never been allowed to visit. The corridors changed as she moved deeper into his territory. Stone walls gave way to dark wood paneling. Military maps replaced decorative art. She passed 2 guards who looked at her like they had seen a ghost. She supposed they had. The study door was open. Caspian sat behind a massive oak desk, his face composed into the expression she knew from public appearances. Controlled. Impenetrable. Nothing like the shattered man who had collapsed in her arms 3 nights ago. He looked up. Their eyes met, and she felt the impact of it in her stomach. "Sit," he said, not unkindly but without warmth. "I owe you an explanation." Caspian said finally, each word sounding like it was being extracted under duress. You do, Sable agreed. The episodes have been getting worse. My physicians have been managing the condition, but the recent deterioration was unexpected. The condition, Sable repeated. You mean your wolf going feral? He flinched. And how long has it been getting worse? The decline accelerated approximately 2 years ago, he admitted. Sable felt the anger rise so fast it startled her. 2 years. 2 years of getting worse, and he had never come to her. Never asked. Never even hinted. She was his wife. She carried the only gift in the known world that could help him. And he had chosen to suffer alone, rather than walk down a hallway. May I ask why? She said, her voice colder than she intended. You waited until you were physically collapsing before coming to me? Considering that calming your wolf is literally the reason I was brought here. The silence that followed could have frozen the room solid. Caspian set down his document. His hands were perfectly steady. His face was perfectly composed. But a muscle jumped in his jaw once, twice, 3 times. Because you were 17, he said. Whatever she had expected, it was not that. You were 17 years old, Caspian repeated, and something in his voice cracked. Just a fraction, just enough to let something raw bleed through. A child, taken from your family and married to a stranger because of a genetic trait you did not ask for. Locked in a wing of a palace in a kingdom you had never visited before your wedding day. He paused, and when he continued, his voice was quieter. I was not going to compound that by making you my caretaker as well. You deserved to have a life. Some semblance of freedom, even if the freedom I could offer was limited. The East Wing, the gardens, your studies. Whatever autonomy I could give you within the constraints of this arrangement. Her anger went sideways, tangled up now with something that ached. So you stayed away to protect me? Yes. While your wolf was destroying you. His jaw tightened. It was manageable. You collapsed on my bedroom floor, Sable shot back. That is not manageable. That is dying. He did not respond. And if the storm had not come? She pressed. What would you have done? The silence stretched so long she thought he was not going to answer. I would have managed, he said finally. They both knew it was a lie. So what now? She asked. I need your help. The words came out stiff and uncomfortable. The physicians believe that regular proximity to the Ashvale gift could stabilize my wolf. They are recommending nightly sessions. Nightly sessions, she echoed. You ignored me for 5 years and now you need me every night. A faint flush touched his cheekbones. I understand the irony, he said quietly. Fine, she said, but I have conditions. First, I want access to the full palace library. Second, I continue my work with Theron. No restrictions. Third, you stop pretending I do not exist. I am not a piece of medical equipment you use at night and store in a separate wing during the day. I am your wife. Start acting like it. The silence that followed was deafening. Agreed, he said, his voice barely above a murmur. Good. Sable stood. I will be at your chambers at 9 tonight. I expect the fire to be lit. And for the record, Your Majesty, I was not a child. I was 17, and I would have helped you willingly if you had asked. She walked out before he could respond. She made it 14 steps down the corridor before her composure crumbled. She pressed her back against the wall, covered her mouth with both hands, and tried very hard not to cry. He had stayed away to protect her. Years of loneliness. Years of feeling unwanted, invisible, discarded. And the entire time he had been protecting her. It did not fix anything, but it changed the shape of the story she had been telling herself. And standing in his corridor, 14 steps from his door, Sable realized that the anger she had been carrying was not going to be enough armor for what came next. Because tonight, she was going to his chambers. And she had no idea what would happen when she got there. The king's chambers smelled like cedar and iron and something animal beneath. The room was enormous, with vaulted ceilings and tall arched windows overlooking the western mountains. A fire burned in the hearth, and the room was warm, just as she had demanded. He had listened. That small detail lodged beneath her ribs like a thorn. Caspian stood near the far window, silhouetted against the evening sky. Dark trousers, a loose linen shirt, bare feet. He looked less like a king and more like someone bracing himself for something unpleasant. "I was not sure you would come," he said without turning around. "I said I would," Sable replied, closing the door behind her. Beside the massive bed, pushed against the wall like an afterthought, sat a narrow cot with a single pillow and a folded blanket. "Theron believes proximity is sufficient," Caspian said. "The same room should be adequate. There is no need for anything else." "This is terrible," she announced, testing the cot. "I can have a better one brought." "No, it is fine. The East Wing mattresses are not exactly luxurious either, in case you were wondering." Guilt crossed his face. Good. She was not above making him feel guilty. "Shall I extinguish the candles?" she asked, pulling her shawl tighter. "I will do it." He moved around the room methodically, pinching out flames one by one. The room dimmed in stages, the fire becoming the only light. Shadows crawled up the walls. The space felt smaller in the dark, more intimate. Sable lay down on the cot and stared at the ceiling. She could hear him cross to the bed. The mattress creaked under his weight. Then silence, except for the fire and the wind outside, and the sound of two people trying very hard not to acknowledge that the other one was breathing. Minutes passed. She could feel his wolf even from across the room, that restless, pacing energy. But it was quieter than during the storm. Less frantic. Her presence was doing something, even at this distance. She wondered if he could feel her gift the way she could feel his wolf. If the calm she radiated was something tangible to him, a warmth, a sound, a color. Sable. His voice came from the dark, low and rough. "Yes." A long pause. "Thank you." She closed her eyes. There it was again. Gratitude. The only thing he seemed capable of offering. She wanted to throw it back at him, to tell him she did not want his thanks. She wanted his honesty, his time, his presence. But he sounded so tired, so genuinely exhausted that the fight went out of her. "You are welcome," she said quietly. His breathing slowed by degrees, the rigid control loosening, the wolf settling. She felt it through her gift. The animal inside him curling down, lowering its head. It took 40 minutes, but eventually he slept. She lay there in the dark and tried to feel nothing. She failed, because here was the truth she could not escape. Something inside her responded to his wolf settling. Her own wolf, dormant for years, lifted its head. For the first time since she could remember, it stirred. The mornings were awkward. That first morning, Sable woke to find Caspian already dressed and standing by the door, clearly waiting for her to leave so he could begin his day without the complication of her existence. "Good morning," she said, sitting up with her hair tangled and her eyes gritty. "Good morning," he replied in the tone of someone who had never once meant those words. She gathered her things and left. But that evening, she returned. And the evening after that. A rhythm formed. She arrived at 9. He was always by the window, always in that same loose shirt and bare feet, as if he needed to be as far from the bed as possible until the last moment. They exchanged a few sentences. The candles went out. But things shifted in ways neither of them acknowledged. On the 4th night, she arrived to find a second pillow on her cot. A proper one, stuffed with down, smelling faintly of lavender. "Where did this come from?" she asked. Caspian did not look up from his letter. "I have no idea." On the 6th night, a thick wool blanket appeared. On the 9th, The cot had been replaced entirely by a proper bed with actual sheets and 2 lavender pillows. "I suppose the staff did this as well," she said. "They are remarkably proactive," he replied, turning a page. Something warm and dangerous bloomed inside her. She crushed it down immediately. But that night, she found herself talking. She told him about Theron's tirade over a junior healer who had confused monkshood with wolfsbane and nearly poisoned a guardsman. "They are the same plant," Caspian said from the dark. Sable paused. "What?" "Monkshood and wolfsbane, aconitum, different common names for the same species." "How do you know that?" A pause. "I read about many things." He had been paying attention to her world, to the things she cared about. Somewhere in the years of silence, the king who had never visited her wing had been reading about plants. She filed that information away and did not mention it again. But she kept talking in the evenings, and he kept listening. And sometimes, very rarely, he responded. Short sentences, carefully measured, but present. He was there. He was listening. And night by night, word by word, the silence between them began to fill with something she did not have a name for yet. One evening, when she ran out of infirmary stories, she told him about the herb garden instead. About the stubborn rosemary that refused to thrive near the east wall, and the patch of wild chamomile that had appeared uninvited and taken over an entire bed. "Chamomile is invasive," he said from the dark. "Once it establishes, it spreads through the root system." Sable turned her head toward his side of the room. "Are you secretly an herbalist?" A pause. The ghost of something that might have been amusement. "I am secretly someone who reads too much and sleeps too little." She smiled in the dark. He could not see it. But somehow she thought he knew. His wolf was stabilizing. Theron confirmed it cautiously. The episodes were less frequent. The feral surges were shorter. The gift was working. But something else was happening too. Each night, her wolf stirred a little more, pressing against her ribs with quiet, insistent pressure. It wanted to be closer. On the 14th night, Sable woke to the sound of the king screaming, not shouting, screaming. She was on her feet and crossing the room in 3 strides. Caspian was thrashing, his body twisted in the sheets, his eyes open but unseeing. The veins in his neck had turned black again, pulsing with that terrible, inhuman rhythm. She grabbed his shoulders. His hand shot out and caught her wrist, the grip so strong the pain was immediate and blinding. But she did not pull away. She pushed the gift outward with everything she had. The beast recoiled, snarled, pushed back. For a horrible moment the wolf and the gift locked in opposition. Then she did something instinctive. She stopped pushing calm at the wolf and instead reached for it. Not to suppress it. To hold it. The way you would hold a terrified child rather than restrain it. The wolf turned toward her. Raw. Ancient. Desperately afraid. It was not trying to escape. Something was hurting it from the inside, driving it mad with pain. The feral surges were not aggression. They were panic. "I see you," she whispered. "You are not alone." The wolf made a sound that vibrated through the bond between her hands and his skin. A whimper, long and low and devastated. The sound of an animal that had been suffering in silence for years and had finally been heard. Caspian's body went limp. The black veins faded. His breathing steadied. Sable slid to the floor beside his bed, her back against the wooden frame, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Her wrist throbbed where he had gripped her. She could already see the bruise forming, dark and angry against her pale skin. But that was not what made her tremble. What made her tremble was what she had felt. Something foreign inside his wolf. Something parasitic. Feeding on it, weakening it, driving it feral from the inside. The gift was not curing him. It was managing symptoms while the thing eating him continued to feed. And it was getting stronger. She sat on the cold floor until dawn, watching him sleep, her mind racing. When the first gray light crept through the windows, she stood stiffly and moved to leave. Your wrist. She froze. Caspian was awake, propped on one elbow, staring at the bruise on her arm. His face was ashen. It is nothing, Sable said quickly. I did that. His voice was hollow. You were asleep. You did not know. He sat up fully, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. His hands were shaking. He stared at them as though they belonged to someone else. This is why I stayed away, he said, and his voice cracked on the last word. I am dangerous, Sable. I am not safe to be near. Stop, she said firmly. She crossed back to the bed and knelt in front of him, forcing him to meet her eyes. Listen to me. Something is wrong with your wolf. Something is hurting it. The surges are not your wolf losing control. They are your wolf in pain. His hands tightened around hers. She watched the information land, watched years of self-imposed exile and guilt reorganize themselves behind his eyes. Are you certain? He whispered. Yes. Someone or something is doing this to you, and we need to find out what. The silence that followed was vast and charged. Then Caspian did something she did not expect. He lifted her bruised wrist to his mouth and pressed his lips against the discolored skin. The gesture was so gentle, so at odds with the violence that had caused the mark, that her breath caught. I am sorry, he said against her skin. I know, she whispered. He lowered her hand but did not release it. They sat there in the growing light, hands intertwined, and Sable felt something shift between them that could not be unnamed or undone. The distance that had defined them, the 112 steps, the separate wings, the years of silence, all of it felt thinner now, more fragile, like ice in spring, still solid enough to stand on but cracking beneath the surface. She went straight to Theron, told him everything. The old physician listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he pulled down a crumbling leather journal and opened it to a hand-drawn illustration that made Sable's stomach turn. A dark, thread-like creature coiled around a wolf's spine. You are describing a blightworm, he said. A parasitic entity that attaches to a shifter's wolf. Not natural. Cultivated by dark practitioners and introduced into a host through contaminated blood or, more commonly, through a cursed wound. A cursed wound? Like a battle wound? Exactly like a battle wound. Theron closed the book. The creature feeds on the wolf's energy, driving the host increasingly feral as it matures. Most hosts are dead within 3 to 4 years. It has been 5, Sable whispered, which tells us 2 things. His wolf is extraordinarily strong to have survived this long, and your gift has been slowing the creature's progress without your knowing it, but not curing him. How do I cure him? The creature must be removed. That requires a healer who can enter the wolf's consciousness directly and extract the parasite without severing the connection between wolf and host. The deep reach. The advanced application of the Ashvale gift. I have never even attempted that. What you described tonight, reaching for the wolf, making contact with its awareness, that is the foundation. You did it instinctively. He paused, removing his spectacles and rubbing the bridge of his nose. It could kill you. If you fail inside his wolf, the creature will turn on you. It will attach to your consciousness and consume it. You will not come back. How long does he have? Theron was quiet for a moment too long. Weeks. Perhaps a month. The episodes are accelerating. Then teach me, she said. Sable did not tell Caspian. She knew what he would do. He would send her away. Dismantle the arrangement. Face whatever was coming alone. Because that is what Caspian Aldrich did. He protected people by pushing them into the distance and calling it love. She would not give him the chance. She trained in secret. Mornings with Theron behind locked doors, working through exercises that left her shaking. The deep reach was not a technique. It was a surrender. She had to dissolve the boundary between her consciousness and another wolf's without losing herself. The first attempts were disastrous. Theron brought in a stable wolf, a mild-tempered beta named Orin, and Sable tried to reach his wolf. She hit a wall so solid it threw her backward hard enough to give her a nosebleed. "You are trying to force your way in," Theron said. "The wolf's mind is not a door you kick open. It is a creature you convince to let you enter." She tried again, and again, day after day, failure after failure. But the evenings continued, and those were changing too. On the 18th night, she found a plate of food on her bedside table. Cheese, bread, sliced pears, a small pot of honey. "You have not been eating," Caspian said from behind his desk. "How do you know that?" "Elspeth tells Drustan. Drustan tells Corvin. Corvin tells me. You have spies in my household?" "It is not espionage, it is administration." He paused. "Eat." She picked up a slice of pear, perfectly ripe, her favorite fruit. "How did you know I like pears?" "Administration," he confirmed. She ate the pear, and every bite tasted like a confession. The nights were growing harder to endure. Not because of the wolf or the episodes or the fear. What she could not manage was the proximity. Weeks of sleeping in the same room, and her body had begun to betray her. She was aware of him constantly, the sound of his breathing, the way the firelight caught the edges of his shoulders when he stood by the window, the low timbre of his voice when he spoke in the dark, which he did more often now, in longer sentences, with less control over what came out. He told her things, fragments mostly, never full stories, just pieces of himself offered into the dark to see if anyone was listening. He told her about his father's assassination, how he had been 19 and asleep in this very room when the guard captain woke him, how the first thing he felt was not grief, but terror, because the crown was coming for him, and he was not ready. He told her about the Western campaign, not the glory, but the mud and the cold and the chaos and the weight of every decision that cost someone their life. He told her, very quietly, on the 21st night, that the wound had come from a blade coated in something black and viscous, that the healer who treated it had called it poison. "But it was not poison," Sable said. "No," Caspian agreed. "I am beginning to understand that now." She wanted to tell him the truth, the words pressed against her teeth. She bit them back every single time. Instead, she talked to his wolf, not in words, but through her gift. Each night, as Caspian fell asleep, she reached for the animal and held it. She learned its rhythms, its fears, its pain. She mapped the shape of the creature coiled around its core, felt the parasite pulse with stolen energy, felt the wolf flinch from its grip, and each night, the wolf reached back toward her with growing trust. It pressed against her consciousness the way a wounded dog presses its nose into a friendly hand, seeking comfort, seeking help. On the 23rd night, everything shifted. She felt the creature inside him move. Not its slow, grinding pulse, a deliberate movement, purposeful. It had noticed her. The awareness that brushed against hers was old, patient, calculating, and hungry in a way that made her stomach heave. It knew she was there. It knew what she was doing. Sable yanked her gift back so hard she gasped. Across the room, Caspian stirred but did not wake. She lay rigid in the dark, her hands clenched in the sheets. She went to Theron at dawn. His face went gray. "It has become aware of you. A blightworm that senses a threat will accelerate its maturation. Days, Sable, not weeks." "Then I go in tonight." "You are not ready. You have not successfully performed the deep reach even once." "If I do not go in, he dies anyway." Theron was quiet for a long time. "Then we try the bond bridge. The deep reach requires you to enter his wolf as a visitor. The bond bridge requires you to enter as a partner. It means binding your wolf to his, permanently. If you succeed, you are bonded for life. If you fail, you both die." She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt clarity. Because her wolf had already chosen. The stirring she had felt that first night on the cot, the growing pull, the way her animal pressed toward his consciousness each evening. It was not just the gift doing its work. It was recognition. Two wolves reaching for each other across the gap between two separate beds. "Tonight," she said. "And do not tell the king. He has a right to live. He can be angry about it later." She made it halfway to the east wing before Caspian stepped out of a side corridor and blocked her path. "You are hiding something," he said. "Everyone hides something, Your Majesty." "Do not call me that." "Not anymore." "Caspian," she corrected herself, and the name felt different now. He took a step closer. Close enough that she could smell him, cedar and iron and warmth, and her wolf surged forward so hard she swayed. "Whatever you are hiding," he said, his voice barely above a murmur, "I will find out." He looked at her mouth, just for a second. Then he stepped back, putting distance between them the way someone pulls their hand from a flame. "Tonight," he said. 9 o'clock. "Tonight," she agreed. He walked away, and Sable stood alone with the knowledge that tonight she would either save his life or destroy them both. Theron's hands were steady as he placed the final mark on Sable's wrist. 3 symbols, drawn in ink mixed with ashwood resin, forming a line from her pulse point to the base of her palm. They tingled against her skin, warm and alive. "The marks will anchor you," Theron said. "When you enter the bond bridge, your consciousness will leave your body entirely. The marks keep the tether between your mind and your flesh intact. Without them, you would have no way back." She stared at the symbols, delicate lines that held the difference between life and dissolution. "And once I am inside, the creature will fight you. It has been feeding for years. It is strong, and it will use everything it can against you. His memories, his fears, his guilt. It knows him intimately." He paused. "You must unmake it. Find where it has attached to the wolf's core and sever the connections one by one." She left the infirmary at dusk. She had bathed. She had eaten, though nothing tasted like anything. She had written a letter to Elspeth with instructions for the herb garden, just in case, and sealed it in her desk drawer. She arrived at his chambers at 9. Caspian was sitting on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, head bowed. He looked up when she entered, and the expression on his face stopped her. He knew something was different tonight. "You look frightened," he said. "I am not frightened," she lied. "You are a terrible liar." He crossed the room and stopped in front of her. Close enough that the heat of him enveloped her, and her wolf pressed forward with desperate need. "What is happening tonight, Sable? Do you trust me?" Something shifted in his expression. Raw. Unguarded. "Yes," he said, and the word sounded like it had been torn from him. "Then lie down, and let me do what I came here to do." She climbed onto his bed and lay down beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. His breath caught. "Close your eyes," she murmured. She could feel his wolf immediately, vast and powerful and suffering, and deeper, coiled around its core, the parasite, pulsing, aware. She reached inward, past the gift, down to where her own wolf lived, the small, quiet animal that had spent weeks waking up, pressing toward his wolf with growing urgency. "I need you now," she told it silently. "I need you to be brave." Her wolf rose, small and silver and fierce in a way that had nothing to do with size. When it reached the boundary between her body and his, it did not push. It offered. The moment his wolf became aware of hers, recognition shocked through both their bodies. Caspian gasped. His hand found hers and gripped hard. His wolf turned toward hers. Enormous, dark, scarred from years of fighting. It looked at her wolf with eyes that burned like embers. "You?" it seemed to ask. "Me," her wolf answered. The bond bridge opened. She was inside. The wolf's interior landscape was a forest, dark, ancient, primordial. Towering trees with bark black as iron, a sky choked with storm clouds, and everywhere, wrapped around every tree, threaded through the soil itself, the creature. Not a single parasite but a network, thousands of dark threads radiating from a central mass buried in the forest floor, each one pulsing with stolen energy. Caspian's wolf stood in a clearing at the center. Magnificent even in suffering, its body riddled with threads, it turned to face her, and its eyes were the same silver as its master's. "I am here," Sable said. "It is going to hurt." The wolf lowered its head. "Trust." She reached for the nearest thread. The creature screamed, not with sound, with sensation. A blast of psychic fury that drove her to her knees. Images erupted around her, pulled from Caspian's memories, weaponized. The assassination, the war, the cursed blade piercing his side, and a voice. "You are nothing. You are a girl playing at medicine." He was mine the moment the blade touched his skin. "You are a parasite," she snarled. "You do not get to have opinions." She grabbed the thread and pulled. The pain was extraordinary, but she held on. One thread down, thousands to go. Time lost meaning. The creature threw everything it had at her. It showed her Caspian's darkest thoughts, that he was unworthy of the crown, that he had married a girl and locked her away and called it protection, when the truth was he had been afraid. Afraid that if he let her close, his wolf would hurt her. Afraid that she would look at him the way his enemies did. The thoughts cut her because they were true. Not entirely. Not fairly. But true enough to make her hands falter. Then her wolf pressed against her. Small and silver and fierce and full of something the creature could not comprehend. Not rage, certainty. The absolute knowledge that the man attached to this suffering wolf was worth saving. Not because he was a king, because he had left pears on her bedside table, because he had learned the Latin name of wolfsbane, because he had stayed away rather than risk hurting someone he barely knew, and that kind of stupid, stubborn, self-destructive love was exactly the kind worth fighting for. Sable plunged both hands into the central mass and wrapped her consciousness around it. "He is not yours. He was never yours, and I am taking him back." The creature thrashed. Trees cracked. The sky split open. She held on. Her wolf held on beside her. Caspian's wolf joined them, and for the first time in years the animal fought back, not against itself, but against the thing that had been torturing it. 3 wolves against a weapon of blood and darkness. The creature shattered. It came apart in waves, each thread dissolving into smoke. The central mass convulsed, shrieked one final time, and collapsed into nothing. The forest changed. Black bark lightened. Storm clouds thinned. A shaft of gold light broke through the canopy, and where the creature had been, green shoots pushed through the dark soil. Caspian's wolf crossed the clearing and pressed its forehead against hers. The bond snapped into place. Permanent. Forever. She felt it lock into her like a second heartbeat. She felt him flood through the connection, every thought, every secret. And she knew he could feel her too, all of her, the loneliness, the anger, the love she had been carrying and pretending she did not. She opened her eyes. She was lying on his bed, her hand gripping his. Tears streamed down her face. Beside her, Caspian's eyes were open, and he was looking at her the way someone looks at the sun coming up after a very long night. "You impossible woman," he whispered. "You impossible, reckless, magnificent woman." He pulled her against his chest and held her so tightly she could not tell where her heartbeat ended and his began. His wolf was quiet inside him, not dormant, at peace. And beside it, curled against its massive dark flank, her silver wolf rested too. Caspian tilted her chin up. His thumb brushed the tears from her cheek. "I wasted so much time," he said, and his voice broke. Yes, you did. I am sorry. I know. I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you. You will try, she corrected, and something that might have been a laugh escaped his throat. He kissed her, slow and careful and devastating. She kissed him back with years of loneliness behind it, and the bond flared so bright she could see it behind her closed eyelids, gold and silver intertwined. When they broke apart, foreheads pressed together, he said, "Stay." One word, the opposite of every word he had spoken for years. Not go, not good evening, not gratitude. Stay. I am not going anywhere, Sable whispered. You are stuck with me, Caspian Aldrich? Good, he said. The East Wing stood empty for 2 months before Sable decided what to do with it. She converted it into a healing ward. Theron grumbled about the disruption, but moved his operation in within a week, and immediately began complaining that the new windows let in too much light. Sable took this as approval. Caspian was still difficult, still stubborn, still private, still constitutionally incapable of expressing emotion without looking like he was passing a kidney stone. He still worked too late and carried the weight of the kingdom on shoulders that refused to bend. But he was present. That was the difference. He joined her for meals. He walked the herb gardens with her on mornings when the council schedule allowed, listening to her explain the difference between 6 varieties of time with an expression she suspected was partly genuine and partly an excuse to watch her talk. He slept. Every night, deeply and peacefully, his body curled around hers in the absurdly large bed that now felt exactly the right size. His wolf slept too, healthy and whole, its dark fur threaded with silver where her wolf had left its mark. The nightmares came sometimes, but when they did, she was there. I have you. You are safe. The cord adjusted, slowly, grudgingly, with the particular resentment of people who had built an entire social hierarchy around the assumption that the queen was decorative and irrelevant. Discovering that she was a healer, a bondmate, and the woman who had saved the king required a significant recalibration of their prejudices. Some managed it gracefully, most did not. Sable found she did not much care. Theron told her once, in his blunt and graceless way, that the bond bridge should not have worked, that no healer in recorded history had performed it successfully on a first attempt, that what she had done was, by any reasonable medical standard, impossible. And yet, Sable had said. And yet, Theron agreed and went back to grinding comfrey. On a morning 6 months after the storm, Sable woke to pale gold light and the sound of rain. Soft rain this time, the kind that fed gardens rather than broke them. Caspian was still asleep beside her, his face peaceful, one arm draped across her waist. The shadows beneath his eyes were gone. The hollows in his cheeks had filled. He looked younger, softer, like someone who had finally set down something impossibly heavy and discovered he could stand upright without it. She pressed her lips to his forehead. He stirred, pulling her closer. What time is it? He murmured. Early. Go back to sleep. He buried his face in her hair. Stay. Their word. The one that meant everything the others did not. Always, she said. The rain fell gently on the palace roof. 2 wolves slept peacefully, curled together in the quiet space behind their master's ribs. And in the room that had once been the loneliest place in the kingdom, 2 people who had wasted years learning how to be apart finally rested in the simple, extraordinary grace of being together. Thank you so much for listening. I will see you very soon for the next one.